So we're aware that everybody will be joining today, starting from a different place around school food procurement. And what we've tried to create is a session that's broken down into three parts. So in part one, what we're going to do is take you through the different catering models and the way in which you might be able, as a local authority, to help schools select the one that will work for them. We're also lucky enough to be joined today by Zara Kiani. Zara, can you make yourself known by waving? Who is joining us from Chefs in Schools. So we'll take a brief break where we can take any questions that you might have about in-house in particular. We're also going to take you through some key messages to land with schools as well around procurement. In part two, we want to move on to really dig into what your role can be as a local authority in supporting schools. We're lucky enough to have three case studies today, one from Southwark, one from Barking and Dagenham, and one from Newham, all of whom are operating different models to support school food procurement. Now, representatives from those boroughs have very boldly offered to be recorded, so we'll be playing you a short video to explain those case studies and also making time for discussion, so for anything that comes up during that. We'll be wrapping up the presentation part of today's session just after 1, and then we've got a full 20-minute slot where you can ask any of our panelists. So me, Nicola, Zara, and our reps from those three boroughs, any questions that might bubble up during the day. Just as a note on how to get the most out of today's session, we've got loads to cover today. So if you have any questions as we go along that you feel cannot wait for those 2 or 3 moments where we're going to be discussing things, by all means, pop them in the chat. I've got my colleague Emily watching the chat who can feed those in as we go. Okay. So where we want you to be by the end of today's session is not just with us in terms of how exciting school food can be, but also we're hoping that we'll leave you with a better understanding of what those different catering models are for school food and the pros and cons of each, how to support schools in your area to find the right one for them, and the different ways in which local authorities can support schools to improve their school food procurement. And what would be really helpful for us, because we have so much to cover, is to understand which area of today's session you might be most interested in. So I'm going to pop up a quick poll. Jump on that. Tell us which area you're most interested in learning about today. We've got the different catering models for schools, what makes them more or less suitable for different schools, key messages, and the ways in which local authorities can support schools. I'll leave that open just for a moment. Okay, thank you, team. So it looks like the 2 top parts that you're most interested in today are looking at those different models and the ways in which local authorities can support schools. And those are the areas that we can focus on accordingly. Thank you. Okay, let's get stuck in. Now, I've told you that I want you to feel excited about school food in the way that we are. And the reason why it excites us so much is really thinking about the opportunity that it presents. So children sit down for lunch 2,660 times between joining reception and leaving school. That's a lot of opportunities to engage with food, not only to deliver nutrition, but also thinking about the social aspects of food, the joy of eating together, and really starting to cultivate a lifelong positive relationship with a varied and nutritious diet. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that school food is a really powerful lever, whether you're interested in reducing health inequality, children's health and well-being, inclusion, attainment, or attendance. A lot of the statistics on here come from a study that a paper that we've pulled together looking at the superpowers of school food, which I'm sure Emily will pop into the chat now. And all the evidence suggests that the Mayor's initiative is having some of these benefits. We're seeing those benefits being delivered to London's children. So there's a really good evaluation of the early phase of the Mayor's initiative to provide universal primary free school meals. And we can see within that paper, it's changing children's experience of school, it's improving their mental well-being, their ability to concentrate, and helping to give them access to that more varied diet, both at home and at school. And it's having a disproportionately positive effect on families receiving universal credit. And the people who were identified as being absolutely central to that process were local authorities. So boroughs really sit at the centre of this initiative and can really have a difference in making it work or not. Now, I've told you that we're going to start by thinking about procurement as part of a whole school approach. So a whole school approach is an approach to school food that has been adopted by the UK government and the World Health Organization. It sees schools as complex systems. We'll be talking today about lunch, so that's part of food across the school day. But we're going to keep trying to open up the discussion about procurement more widely than that to incorporate some of the other elements here. So, for example, I've mentioned we have another follow-up seminar that's happening on the 27th. That will be looking at driving uptake. So thinking about the dining environment, thinking about how to engage with pupils and families, thinking about leadership, all of these different elements which can work together to drive uptake and appetite for the food that's being served. So procurement is central to really improving children's nutrition at school, but it's only one part of it. And we're going to try and keep weaving in these different elements as we go through. And we know from the time that we spend in schools eating dinner and watching children eat their dinner that it can make a really big difference. We want to move away from the meal on the left and move towards the meal on the right. Okay, I'm going to pass over now to Nicola to take us through the first segment of today.
Thank you, Eve. The first step when assisting schools with food procurement is awareness and access to the most appropriate operating model that is most likely to consistently provide pupils with that nutritious and delicious meal. We're all aware that there are two key operating models. There's the third-party outsourced model, and then there's the in-house. Each one has varying permutations, as can be seen on this slide. As these are self-explanatory, let's focus for a moment on the hybrid models. These models utilize professional expertise, but acknowledge that responsibility and accountability is retained by the school. These hybrid models are less known, and they are differing combinations incorporating delivered in and on-site production and the use of in-house teams and third-party specialisms. Amongst these hybrid models are some really creative uses of third-party suppliers. For example, there's a model that starts with the ingredient supply. The ingredients are supplied through the food chain by a well-known provider. The menus are generated by that provider in conjunction with the school and are school food standard compliant. These menus are pre-costed, incorporating the costs from that supplier from their ingredient supply chain, and are controlled by them. That leaves the kitchen team with the task of producing that food, using those recipes that match the menus that are also generated by the supplier. This model reduces the elements of risk, such as cost control, the quality of the ingredients, and the menu compliance against the school food standards. It is a model that is coming through and being used and looked at more visibly and transparently, and certainly something to consider suggesting to the schools. This now leads me in to talk to you a little bit about the benefits and the risks of each of those models. Of course, of those seen on the slide, there are several different elements, but I want us to focus on some of the highlights that are worthy of note when considering the outsourced third-party provision or the in-house provision, and to consider that they are also relevant to the hybrid alternatives. For an outsourced or a third-party model, the key benefit is the continual access to expert managerial control, and of course the available professional resources that support that control. The second one is compliance and the accountability of compliance. We all know that special diets and food safety are really critical in terms of constant safe delivery, and that is provided through an outsourced third party. The responsibility for financial management and cost control from the raw ingredients right the way through to the school invoicing, this firmly sits in the ownership of that third party. That leaves us with the key risks. The key risks are that the schools have less hands-on influence over the service provision. There is and will be a reliance on the third party's capabilities, the third party's resources and their inputs into the school provision, and that there is potentially less access to curriculum links and community activities if delivered through a third party. Clearly, the benefits and the risks just mentioned switch over with an in-house model, so I won't reiterate. But there are the additional benefits of more flexibility and influence over decisions and actions that can impact on the food procurement process and result in a high-quality meal on the plate with an in-house provision. The catering team loyalty and commitment to the school is probably more focused and more concentrated. And the biggest risk for in-house is not having the resources or support or knowing where to go to for advice and assistance. This leads me into how can the local authorities assist schools in determining which model works best for them, and what do they need to consider, and how do you signpost them to those considerations? So when supporting a school in the decision-making process of which operating model to adopt, these are factors that we consider need to be considered. The school's available resources. Does it have a kitchen team? What, if they do have a kitchen team, how capable are that kitchen team? How skilled is the cook and the chef? How much do they want to be trained and to be upskilled? Can they work independently, or do they need to have support and assistance? And how much knowledge do they have beyond the meal on the plate? The next point is the kitchen facilities and the equipment available. We know that not all schools have a production kitchen. Some might have a kitchen, but it can't produce food. Does it have adequate storage, even if it is a production kitchen? And is there access to that storage? Is the equipment reliable and trustworthy? The number of pupils requiring lunch is a very interesting factor. Economies of scale and numbers of lunches needed can determine affordability. And of course, affordability can drive the operating model decision and the costs and outcomes of that decision. It's an interesting fact that any less than 300 lunches per school usually costs a school between £50 and £100 per annum per pupil above the cost of the meal. And that is irrespective of the operating model. Clearly, it can be more transparent if it's an in-house model, but it's irrespective. The school's location and remoteness, this is not so applicable with the London boroughs, but it still needs to be a factor when considering the style of model that's best appropriate. The management supervisory expertise that are available. Schools shouldn't and don't underestimate how much time it takes and how much knowledge is needed to ensure that all pupils get access and receive that nutritious and delicious meal on a daily basis. It is incredibly time-consuming. The cultural diversity of pupils requiring a lunch needs to be a factor as well. The more diverse the audience, the more resource that's needed to successfully deliver and to achieve the desired outcomes. That goes right from the ingredients that are needed, right the way through to the production through the school team. Other pressures and priorities are that schools are busy places and there's daily known and unknown pressures. Therefore, the chosen model shouldn't be an additional pressure, but it should still remain a priority. I'm now going to hand back to Eve, who's going to provide some insight into the help available for in-house model delivery specifically. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm going to immediately pass the ball back to all of you to say that we've got a kind of 5-minute quick clinic where I'm wondering if anybody has any questions either for Zara about in-house models or for Nicola about outsourcing, just before we move on to the next segment of today's presentation. The floor is open. I know we have somebody in from Richmond today, if I'm right. And my understanding is that you've made a switch from or supported a number of different schools in the borough to go in-house. Is that right? No? Any other questions?
Hi, Eve. I could pop in with a question that was pre-submitted.
Yes, please. That would be lovely. Thank you.
So there was a question about supporting schools to move from one catering model to another, and I wondered if Nicola or Zara had any thoughts on that.
I think it'd be a really good opportunity for Zara to introduce herself, because I'm not sure you've had the opportunity to. So that would be really great. And then perhaps you can segue nicely into how chefs in schools support. I think that would be really great. And then I can pick up if it's still there's a necessity.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Nicola. Yes, so hi, I'm Zara. I'm the Senior Programme Manager at Chefs in Schools, looking after the Transformation Programme. So the Transformation Programme is really aimed at driving reappraisal of what's possible within the school kitchen. It can be quite a kind of big step for schools to make, but we've worked with hundreds of schools across the UK now, and most of them are still in-house, which is fantastic. They've got like a 94% rate of success, which is brilliant. A lot of the work we do is ensuring that you have the right staff, getting the right kind of head chef and staff in place, because often the role of that head chef when you are in-house becomes more senior. They have to kind of help looking at record keeping, kind of cost efficient staff structures, things like that, looking at suppliers and procurement, ensuring they're working kind of one step above the rest, and also aligning with the school values as well when it comes to a kind of clear school vision. I think that's really the opportunity about moving in-house, kind of school food becoming almost a source of pride, and that could be an opportunity to really kind of engage with the community and parents as well. I'm not sure if there are any kind of specific questions. I could talk about our programme forever, but I might probably derail the whole webinar. So if there are any kind of specific questions you'd like me to answer, please jump in.
Hi, can I ask a question, please? I wanted to find out if you support schools in the transition process from moving from one model to another. I'm in Hackney, and I'm aware that we have a lot of neurodiverse children who, when moving from processed food to, for example, food with sauces or things that they're not recognising as food that they would normally be served, say, in the home. We have a lot of issues with children not picking up that food when and the issues that are created for the school when they change those models, like learning how, like modeling that kind of process, or learning from schools which have been through that process. I'm just aware that it can be a huge leap for some of our schools under really time pressure, and I think schools are wanting to do this but worried about how much of their time and also how to support children to cope with like more freshly produced foods in different formats that they're not used to having. They've not had that modelling of that food before.
And it's a good question. I think we learned very early on in our charity days that particularly schools that might have had to be, say, carbohydrate sort of dense menu, your jacket potatoes and whatnot, the more plain foods, if we remove that from the menu too quickly, that almost is just too soon. And really, we say it's a journey. And really, the test we always give for school food is, are the staff eating? Are they kind of finding it interesting? And do they find it delicious and nutritious? Because if we won't eat it, then, how do we kind of expect our children to as well? So a lot of what we do is kind of working in partnership with schools. So yeah, absolutely. Our transformation program is a year long, but you get access to membership. And we have a phrase, much to our kind of detriment for sleep, is that a school never quite disappears from Chefs and Schools. They are always part of our network, and we always want to support schools whatever happens. I guess there's two parts to answer your question. The first is ensuring that you've got the right team in place, having a really kind of strong head chef who's passionate about food, who's excited with food education, parental engagement, who's kind of invested in school nutrition and school food, and being a part of School Pride is really important. And so we support and we offer advice on job descriptions and things like that, and we can support with getting that sort of awareness out as well. And the second one is, as you can imagine, uptake is very important. It's an important part, as sort of Nicola mentioned, about sort of cost efficiencies, and also we want to make sure the kids are enjoying their food. And there's kind of a couple of parts to that. One is that we engage and educate students along the way to ensure that they're just trying new ingredients. We have sort of free testing and things like that. We have tactics with like kind of to drive parental engagement as well. So we have something called Come Dine With Me, which is where we invite parents to come to the school to try the food that was actually served to children that day. And then to build on your particular point around sort of cultural difference, I think one of the benefits for us about going in-house is the agility actually to kind of create a food menu that is reflective of the people population. A kind of menu that's served in rural Devon might differ from sort of inner city London because of the makeup of those sorts of students. So it really allows you to kind of speak to parents, respond to parents and to students as well. As Nicole, our kind of founder, always says, that the students are our kind of client. They're the kind of people that we need to make sure we impress and keep happy. So we also encourage like student councils and things like that. I mean, the list is endless in terms of tactics we deploy, and we're always kind of up for testing out new things. Another phrase we have is that we're always up for a challenge, and we've done all sorts to support schools to kind of move in the house, and most of them are still with us, which is wonderful.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's a great question from UK, and a really good kind of overview. Ben, I can see that you have a question from Haringey about kind of that shift from a simpler to a more varied menu as well. And I wonder if Sarah's covered off some of that, but I'd just like to remind you that we'll have an opportunity to go over any other questions in the segment right at the end of today. Okay, thanks, guys. Let's move on. So Nicola, I'll pass back to you for those key messages to convey when local authorities are talking to the schools in their area.
Okay, thank you. Well, once the decision has been made, and that decision perhaps is for schools specifically outsourcing with tackle first, they may turn to the local authority to say, well, how can you assist us? So I think some of the key messages are that when advising schools on considering outsourcing, then the route to market is the first step to achieving a successful partnership. There are many routes to tender, as stated on here, but inevitably you will be procuring in some way. So regarding this point, it will be some form of procurement process will need to be undertaken, and there are different ways in achieving this and different routes that can be adopted. From including schools in frameworks or signposting them to established frameworks, there are buying clubs that can offer that support and help. There are consultancy practices, and there's also the two-stage competitive flexible procedure, which is the public procurement route. If there's an opportunity to bolt onto a framework or to cluster schools together, then clearly that is a route that a school ought to be exploring, because it provides the economies of scale and the best practices prevail. The local authority could offer training and procurement workshops for school leaders and provide advice on public tendering processes, even if it's in the way of a sense checklist, or if it's signposting to specialisms. Another way that we believe that the local authority could assist schools is to have some form of portfolio of third-party providers. These could be third-party providers that the schools could approach in the first instance that have got credibility and capability and are known to have an existing supply chain either within that borough or beyond, that have the capability and the capacity to potentially be considered as an outsourced partner. Be wary of too good to be true. The outsourced market for schools is very competitive. It is essential that schools are not seduced by affordability. Larger contractors' main income stream is through the food ingredient supply chain. Therefore, they can buy a school through the meal price to gain that supply chain volume, which will obviously increases their income stream. This can result in them struggling to deliver. And if they're struggling to deliver, they could cut quality and cost. So it's just being wary of that. Prioritize through the process quality over price at every possible opportunity. And what I mean by that is that if you set the evaluation criteria as technical, attracting 70% of the 100% in terms of scores and price being 30, that tender can't be bought. It provides some safeguarding in terms of ensuring that affordability is still key, but procurement of the service because of price point is not the priority. Local authorities can undertake a benchmarking exercise that schools could access. Now, that benchmarking exercise could identify what price the schools are paying per meal and the cost of any catering services above that meal price within the borough. This will help provide some context to the schools that are considering outsourcing and considering the tenders when the tenders come back to see, well, how do they look in comparison to what other people are paying? I think that's a great service that the local authority could provide. So begin thinking about your contract at least 3 terms before it expires. If you can prompt schools to review their current contract if they have one, and to review it and revisit it, and to consider starting the process as early as possible. We like to say that a year is a good time by which to start thinking about either procuring or changing your model, but the minimum has to be 3 terms. It's also important that the schools are reminded that they can change their mind. It's okay to change their minds. And if they're going through the procurement process, they can halt it at any time. And the process can result in a non-award. That's okay. If there is an outcome that's unexpected or undesired, that again doesn't need to be a disaster. It can be revisited. The operating model can change. There are step-in solutions available that can be shoehorned into a school to assist them both in the short term and the long term. And the final point on this is that the schools don't need to reinvent the wheels. There are resources available and the local authority can signpost the schools to those resources. It's really important that a school gets a specification right if they're going through any form of procurement for school food. And helping write that specification is a fundamental resource. Equally, with the evaluating criteria and understanding what that's going to tell the schools when those tenders come back, as well as setting KPIs that can then be used by the school as an easy way of monitoring and having an oversight of how the contract is performing. Now, all those resources are available through frameworks, through blind clubs, through consultancy practices, and can be signposted by the local authority so that the schools have them available. So with regard to in-house, having covered the key messages when considering an outsourced service, these are the focal points when supporting schools for an in-house provision. We've already heard from Zara from Chefs in Schools, who provide an incredible amount of in-house service support. And School Food Matters also provide a lot of help with school food standard compliance and signposting. So there is plenty of support out there for in-house schools, and we'll be pulling together links and contacts as a result of this webinar that provide the local authorities with the information needed to signpost schools on in-house procurement specifically. A message also for the schools is don't be frightened by compliance, but be aware. Providing the schools with checklists that cover food safety and medical diets specifically can be really helpful. And signposting them to organisations and maybe departments within the local authority that can provide advice on human resources, on grievances, and anything to do with that in-house school team where that support is not necessarily readily available. Provide training on baseline compliance for school administrators. The school administrators and the business managers that we talk to in primary schools are very aware of how important that procurement compliance is, but actually are very wary of it. And I think if with some simple reassurance and some guidelines and a little bit of baseline training, we can take away those fears. Don't reinvent the wheel in terms of planograms, menus, all sorts of sort of support information that's available. The suppliers, in terms of the food chain suppliers, can often provide templates for menu planning that also ensure that the school food standards are complied with. And also templates for costing of menus, which are things when you're providing an in-house service in a small primary school, very overwhelming for the head chef or whoever's taking on that ownership, as Zara mentioned earlier. So these are all available. It's a matter of signposting and providing them and highlighting them to the schools. I'm now going to hand over to Eve, who's going to run through how School Food Matters can assist specifically with the school food standards. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you, Nicola. I spend a lot of my working life banging on about school food standards, and the reason for that is that they are really quite fundamental. What we find when we go into schools is that often schools, particularly if they've outsourced their catering, but not only then, have outsourced responsibility for school food standards. So school food standards set a minimum standard of nutrition for food served at school, and schools have a statutory responsibility to monitor the compliance with them. So if you take one thing away from today, or if you pass over one thing in your conversations with schools, I would recommend making it about school food standards. So make schools aware that the responsibility rests with them, that it's mandatory, and that it's a statutory requirement. I think often when schools first hear that, if they weren't aware before, they can start to feel a little bit sweaty palmed and think, how will I do that? Actually, it's not that tricky, monitoring compliance with school food standards. And one of the reasons it's great, in addition to securing a kind of a reasonable standard of food being offered on the menu, is that it also can open really good conversations between senior leaders in the kitchen. So we, as Nicola, you kindly said, have a range of different checklists and guides to support schools in doing that. Emily, thank you. I can see that you've pasted that link into the chat. So go and have a look, see if you can connect schools to those resources. Obviously, you can make your own guidelines, spot check tools, get ahead on training schools in your area. Standards will be a big part of the training series that's coming up for senior leaders and governors in schools, both of whom play a role in that. And there is also some evidence that undertaking periodic auditing, which is something that you could do as the local authority, can be useful too for raising compliance with standards, as long as that's connected then to being able to follow up with some advice and guidance about how to meet compliance. So we've mentioned already a couple of resources that are in the chat, and that part of the Great Plates Partnership will be delivering a wider package of tailored resources around procurement. Please tell us what it is that would be of greatest use to you. Please use the chat, jump on now, Give us something to think about when we come to design these resources. What would you most like to have? Could be a resource for yourself, could be a resource for local schools in your area. Okay, I can see you've put follow-up advice, so I would just flag, of course, that we will have those meet the consultant sessions scheduled in soon as part of this program. If there's anything else you think, templates, guidelines, checklists, pop them in the chat now or as we go through, and that will be useful for our reference. Okay, on to the next part of today's session. Different ways local authorities can support schools. So, we are lucky enough today to have 3 really excellent case studies that we can bring to you. What we also wanted to do was to provide some information about what any local authority can do to support schools around procuring school food. So what we find is that school food is one of those topics that can really fall between at least 2 stools in the local authority. It can fall into education, public health, and procurement. Often all of these teams have something to do with school food, but they're not speaking to each other. And we also find that more than one department within every local authority will have an agenda that can be progressed successfully through school food. So whether you're interested in sustainability, attainment and attendance, child health and wellbeing more broadly, health equality, food insecurity, all of these things are relevant to a discussion about improving school food in your borough. And what we would recommend every time is to come together to get better conversations between different teams happening. Now, ideally, that would take the medium of a school food working group, but even kind of initial conversations, tentative ones, to sound out whether there is a shared agenda there and whether you could collaborate more closely around school food would be very welcome. It's also about mapping out not just your agendas and where those overlap, but also different initiatives that might be happening inside your borough. So it could be a School Food Matters programme like Nourish, you could be running healthy schools, there could be work around oral hygiene being delivered by the NHS, schools can be delivering work around transitions. All of these places are moments when you could be talking about school food, or they're initiatives focused on school food that could be better joined up. So it's really worth having those chats to see if you can make that offer feel more cohesive and more joined up to schools. The next step is finding out what's going on in local schools. Who is providing the food? Do schools like it? Are they satisfied? What are they struggling with? How would they like you, as a local authority, to support them around procurement and that wider picture of delivering good quality school food? We would recommend making the most of those moments where you're already in conversation with schools. So you might have a head teacher's breakfast, for example. Don't waste that opportunity when you're chatting about lunch. Really ask them about the whole day. So that's a key part of the whole school approach to food. Thinking about lunch, yes, but also every moment where children are interacting with food across the day, be that on the plate, in the curriculum, in the classroom, wherever it might be. We would also say that local authorities can do a lot by just bringing together clear resources and templates for schools. So save them time, give them some kind of clarity of messaging around what the expectation is for school food in your area and what your thoughts are around what quality looks like, what good looks like. Schools have told us that they would like their local authority to be a sort of backstop. So when they receive questions about school food, might be about allergens, might be about eligibility, might be about something much more granular like packed lunch. They like to pass it up. They like to refer to their local authority and say, well, that's how we do things in this borough. So offering clear messaging, bringing together resources and templates into one place, that can really clarify things for schools and is potentially something that all local authorities can do. We've mentioned training a couple of times already on this call. So we do training, Chefs and Schools do training. There's a range of other high quality training offers available looking at school food. So I would recommend for governors, the National Governance Association training. It's all out there to have a look at. I think one thing that schools respond really well to is learning not just from external agencies, but also from each other. So connecting them to each other, helping them to share good practice, that also has real value in our experience too. And then to build on that foundation, You could also consider taking a more active role in procurement. So that might be, for example, running a framework, holding a contract, or setting up local authority catering offer. So this is my way of doing a neat segue into our 3 case studies today from Southwark, Newham, and Barking and Dagenham, all of whom are delivering against that kind of more elevated offer around supporting procurement locally. So what we would like to do is show you a brief video outlining what their approaches have been and what the benefits of that have been. And then we'll come back together again for questions and answers.
In Southwark, we do not have a local authority caterer. We also do not have a single school contract for all of our schools. Each of our schools have the autonomy to individually procure or choose to have their catering service in-house. Southwark Council are fortunate to have had the support of Impact on Urban Health, working in partnership with us on a programme, the School Meals Transformation Programme, which commenced in 2021. We realised through the programme there is a need for more oversight from the local authority and more support of school business managers. One of the large pieces of work was to think about how we can support schools who are individually procuring outsourced catering services from a local authority's perspective. Very fortunately, we noticed early on in our project that a couple of our schools were using a service provided by the Department for Education called Get Help Buying for Schools. We spotted an opportunity to work in partnership with them to see what Get Help Buying for Schools could do to support at a local authority level. So we've developed our framework agreement in partnership with Get Help Buying for Schools. Now, very much so that council set the specification, the contract requirements, and thought about what monitoring would be in that framework at framework level and at call-off level. So we've had very much control over that. But what Get Help Buying for Schools has helped us do is to tender that framework award.
So we have a council and catering company. They deliver a school catering service for us. I think around 2/3 of schools use it. They pay London Living Wage. They provide a really high quality service. Part of that work that we do is about supporting schools and taking a whole school approach. So the school food is one part of this, and making sure that as many children as possible have access to like a good quality school meal is really important. But so is kind of access to inspiring food education and kind of that understanding the role and value of school food. You know, I suppose as we kind of move forward with the wider food strategy in the borough, having that arrangement just makes more and more sense.
The first thing when it comes to procurement and schools in Newham that we think about is the fact that schools are ultimately the buyer, and we need to work with them, we need to support them so that they know both the opportunities and the responsibilities they have when they're procuring a school meals provider. In Newham, Eat for Free is the longest standing universal meal scheme in the country, and every borough in London now has a universal primary meal scheme and has the opportunity to attach to that scheme grant conditions and grant principles. And those grant conditions can include an ask such as using the London circular procurement tools and asking all caterers to engage with those.
Pupil voice has been a real focus of our service specification. Getting kids to choose healthy meals that are appealing to them can be a real challenge. And in Southwark, which is such a diverse borough, giving our pupils a voice in what they eat and allowing them to suggest some of the recipes they might eat in their community at home, it just really adds to the richness of our school food menus and keep a two-way conversation between the customer and the caterer. So we've required that in our contract, that there's a focus on consultation with pupils and taking pupils' feedback into account when designing menus.
Look, for schools, it's about getting somebody that's accountable, isn't it? If you work with a local authority caterer, if you work with somebody local, there is that intense accountability. We all feel differently about where we live, don't we? We all feel differently about the things we do on our own doorstep. And there's an obvious reality to that. If you're calling up a head office that is 15 minutes down the road, there is that fantastic connection, that accountability, that knowledge of place. For students, it's about meals that are tailored to their needs. It's about a caterer that is well set up to deal with the things that matter to your community, your student. Newham is a very diverse place, and understanding that and knowing how to build inclusive menus. If you have a workforce that is well paid on London Living Wage and above, a workforce that is on good pensions, a workforce that has been together and well looked after for a long time, those things are things worth valuing.
We agreed to become the 5th signatory of the London Food Purchasing Commitment, which really looks at big improvements and big reductions in the carbon emissions related to school food service, related to reductions in food waste. And again, we're meeting regularly to work out different approaches, different projects, and to make sure that we're collecting the data as we need to.
Through the promotion of a good food culture within the school context, you really promote an understanding of why that's important, and just generally speaking about food in like a more kind of like positive way, and demonstrating how it influences positive, say, behavior within the classroom as well. So yeah, it goes without saying that there's so many benefits to understanding and celebrating good food in schools.
Thank you so much to all of our contributors for that video. I can see that we're joined today by representatives from each of those boroughs. So Andy, I know you're with us, Lily from Barking and Dagenham, and Faria from Southwark. So we have reps from each of the 3 boroughs. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to pitch in about those 3 different models? I know that we have some questions that were pre-submitted, and I wonder if we could maybe use one of those to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, of course. There was a question for Andy that was about the grant conditions that he mentioned. If you could give a bit more information on what they include and about the process that Newham took to get to that point.
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Have I managed to unmute successfully? So grant conditions and grant principles was something we thought about in 2019 before the pandemic. We realised that we've got this grant for £6 million a year, as it was then in Newham, and at that point, of course, it's not being paid for by the Mayor of London, it's being paid for by local funds, and we realised there's an opportunity here to ask for more than just the meal. So we've done a bit of work on meal quality, and that had happened in sort of 2016, 2017, saying, right, are we asking and ensuring that the meals are the right quality? But it occurred to us that actually there were no limits to what we could ask for in terms of that whole school approach to food, in terms of alerting schools to the opportunities and the wider opportunities around the grant. Very early focus for us was, and you can see all of these, and I'll try and drop these in the chat, or my colleague has done that. Thank you very much. I tell you what, we're good in Newham, isn't it? Before you even think it, it's done. So thank you, Kathy. So grant conditions, the opportunity was firstly around a focus on London Living Wage and LGPS. Somebody spoke earlier about kitchen loyalty and staff retention. We in the borough, those staff belong to the borough. Private sector contractors can come and go if a school isn't with our catering service, but actually those residents, and it's 87% of the people who work in our school kitchens are Newham residents. Looking after those staff really has a long-term impact on the quality of the service. Big focus on trying to stimulate local procurement and local supply chains, and that's something that's gathered pace in recent years, and that's a key grant condition. And Kathy, I've gone completely blank, but the third of those 4 grant conditions in a similar space, around something we can actually ask for. And then alongside that, you've got the grant principles, and those grant principles are very much focused on expecting every school to be on a journey towards whole school approaches to food. Now, we've built that in to the condition around, for every school taking the grant money, that you need to be on the journey to getting all of those conditions implemented. We're now at a place where, for the first time, we've had some of those principles in every school in the borough. Delighted to have had food growing at every school in the borough last year. And that's a really, really big step forward, bringing everybody along together with the grant.
Thank you, Andy. I can see more questions popping up in the chat. Let's take these broadly in order.
I can answer Kay's question if that's of interest.
Yes, why not? Take it away.
There are several boroughs I know looking at this because they come to Newham and have a conversation about actually what would it take us to get a caterer up and running. The conversation about hybrid models didn't explicitly talk about reaching out to your friends and neighbours who still have a service. But I can say, and I'm sure LBBD feel the same way, we'd welcome that conversation. Scale matters. I talked a bit about why local matters in terms of that control and oversight, and it wasn't covered in the hybrid piece. But if you've got elected members eating the meals, if you've got schools eating the meals and an office you can walk to from any school in the borough, that's very different to getting your catering bussed in from a company with their head offices in Reading, if you're in Newham, or in Dundee, if you're in Newham. So that's very much an interesting conversation. There are lots of boroughs looking at that journey of travel. I know that.
Thank you, Andy. Ben, I can see you've added, how are local authorities getting buy-in from schools to not prioritise cost as the most important aspect of school food procurement? We know that schools are under enormous financial pressures. Now, Lily, I wondered if you felt able to respond to that. I know that when we were interviewing Joanna, she mentioned that cost pressures are a big challenge in the borough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think with us working with BD Together, they're our borough-owned catering company. We've just been promoting the fact, for example, that they are a silver accredited Food for Life caterer, and they also pay London living wage. So I think it's just, and as Andy pointed out, there's such a value in working with the local caterer as well. So there's the value that schools really do have, and I think because it aligns with their vision and values, to pay local people as part of their catering team, and also to see the benefits from having, say, caterers that feel a part of the whole school staff team as well. And really, we're just coming from the perspective that if we can create a community around food within a school context, and also celebrate what it really means to work with a caterer that will supply a certain standard of food that maybe will be more nutritious as well, that there are like the nutritious benefits from food that is maybe procured in a more sustainable way, and the knock-on effects that will have on behavior, as well as nutrition, well-being, and life chances of the pupils. But really, it's kind of around aligning your catering and your school food policy with the school's vision and values, and even supporting schools to see how those links can be made.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lily. Andy, did you want to briefly come back on that?
Yeah, and it was almost a question for the group because it's something new that we've tuned into this year. So the government sends you money at 266 for 100% of your pupils. They're never all in school, based on every primary school I've ever visited and the sniffles that come to my house and keep kids out of school. The means tested free school meals have an area code adjustment applied to them, as well as being sent to your school at 100%, even though best school is what, 92% take up. And then the final piece in that jigsaw is obviously the money that we get from the Mayor of London, which is given out at a nominal rate based on a take-up rate. Now, I think there's a very interesting piece of work for all boroughs, making your schools are aware of exactly how much food money is in the budget. Now, that can't solve the universal problem of schools feeling like they don't have enough money and their budgets feeling under tremendous pressure. But actually, our job here is to make the case for food and how much they should be spending on food, and identifying food as the difference maker. So there's a really interesting piece of work that we're working on, and for years on this call, I think probably quietly the leaders on this, they don't shout about it, but Southwark have been doing tremendous work for years in this area and have got phenomenal expertise. And others I know have that. We're looking at just making sure schools are aware how much is actually in the pot on food, because those three numbers confuse me. 266 area code adjusted figure that would then be £3 something, and then Mayor Khan's figure of 3. And because they all have different formulas, so there's a big piece of work on making sure schools know this is how much money there is for food. And if you're not spending it, well, you're going to be dealing with a product that doesn't match up to what you should be getting, doesn't it? You know, that's a fairly fundamental thing. I'm looking around, I've only got a few people on camera. Does that make sense? Have I explained that in a way that can be understood? Because it's still pretty new to me, thinking about those three pots in different ways. Free, you've got your hand up. Come on in, because you're the top borough on this, I think.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yep, sorry, I've been listening very quietly in the background, and I was worried this moment might come. So, completely echo everything Andy's just said. I think so. Gillian kind of went through the framework that we have and how we've been working with Get Help to Buy for Schools and the service that they've offered to us and to schools to help manage that process. What we've found through quite extensive communication with schools is they just have no idea what's happening with their school food finances for the most part. School business managers, finance managers, head teachers, they're very aware of their finances, but I wouldn't say that the granularity around school food is fluent, and that's not kind of through fault of the schools. School food funding is really confusing and it comes through different sources, and it's kind of no wonder they struggle to kind of keep on top of it. And as we've kind of heard as well, we have the model of kind of these rolling outsourced contracts and kind of specifications not being updated year on year, and schools just kind of signing things off but not necessarily getting into the detail of it. So actually we find that schools do struggle with that aspect of buying and procurement and general school food finances. So what we've been able to offer through our framework, and again this is, you know, Get Help to Buy for Schools have been instrumental in this, is actually we've presented it as a free ready-made but also tailored offer, which takes away the stress of actually doing that exercise of kind of including all of the ingredients of you know, what they need in a contract. And they have the added scrutiny from us as a council through our visits and through our comms, through our school management transformation programme of actually we're really on your case about you need to be meeting school food standards and we want to help you to do that. This is actually a really key way of being able to do that. So you actually don't have to worry about that anymore. And when we drop in or when we chat to you on the phone, we know that we have a trusted list of suppliers who are meeting all of the expected standards, who are paying London Living Wage, you know, all of those kind of peripheral bits, so that they kind of don't really have to worry about that. And it's all kind of baked in, and they've got what they need in terms of a completely free service, which takes some of the admin burden off procurement. Their food is school food standards compliant. It's all kind of co-produced with families. They've got a trusted supplier who we manage the relationship with. So again, it takes away a bit of that burden. So I know what we have is quite unique, but it's quite a good deal. So that's how we've been able to present what, you know, our framework through Get Help to Buy for Schools. And we do have other schools, I'm sure other boroughs have had a similar experience. We have had other schools who have worked with Get Help to Buy for Schools in a similar way, kind of just on a one-off basis. So that's kind of how we've sold it. But, you know, equally, there has been a really big engagement period with schools that my colleague Kirsty's been undertaking to actually help them understand what we're offering and the value for money, and that kind of hand holding. That's always kind of something that we need to do, which is totally expected as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria. So thank you. That's a really comprehensive response. I'm going to bring us back just to briefly wrap up the presentation segment of this so we can jump back into these questions and answers shortly. Thanks to both of you. So, wrapping up, what we want is for you to leave with, sorry for it, I'm just trying to unpin you. I'm going to leave that to a colleague of mine. There we go. Hopefully we've provided you with a bit of inspiration with our 3 case studies. What we want you to leave with is the concept that all local authorities can definitely provide some degree of support for schools when it comes to procurement in the ways that we've discussed: better conversations, a central place for resources, portfolios. All of this work can add value. We want you to begin that conversation by convincing schools of the value of better school food. I think most school leaders know that school food can assist them with things that they are very bothered by, such as attendance and attainment, better inclusion and belonging. They might just need reminding. And just as we've done today, it's good to begin that conversation with a reminder about the power of school food to achieve those different things. Absolutely join up with other local authority teams to try and align those agendas and set kind of short, medium, longer term goals. And then bear in mind as well what we've talked about with regards to the whole school approach. So procurement is quite central in terms of delivering better food on every plate. However, keep in mind all of those moments across the school day when children are encountering food, learning about food, and think about those different aspects of the whole school approach. So, if I can have the next slide. What I would recommend, certainly for situating your response to schools within that wider approach, is that you attend the next webinar, which is happening next Tuesday on the 27th, 12 to 1:30. So that webinar will cover off issues around driving take up. So we've got information there for you. Pardon me, looking at kind of lessons from research and practice about how to do that, stuff about auto-enrollment, stuff about increasing access for children with SEND, stuff about allergens, medical diets, and a bit around sustainability and using school food to help you meet those targets too. We've then got 3 webinars scheduled, which are for schools. The first 2 are for schools that have outsourced. So the first one is around on the 5th of February around the tender process and navigating that. So a little dose of technical expertise there. The second one on the 12th of February for schools is about contract management. Again, something we find that schools struggle with. So building a solid relationship with your caterer, something that can really be a foundation for better delivery. And then on the 12th of March, we will have Chefs in Schools back again for an in-house special with us. So that kind of sustaining quality and consistency, but for in-house schools. And then, as we've mentioned, we've got this suite of other resources, trainings, and opportunities to talk to catering consultants as we go through. So please do stay in touch with us. I've put up our kind of general emails. So one for School Food Matters, Chefs in Schools, and of course, Panache. Contributors, if you're happy for people to contact you directly, please pop your direct email into the chat now. And then without any further ado, we've still got a good 23 minutes to start talking through any additional questions that we might have, either for our panelists or for Nicola. So on the panel today, as a reminder, we've got Nicola from Panache, Zara Kianu from Chefs in Schools, Andy from Newham. We've got Faria Chowdhury from Southwark, and Lily McSweeney from Barking and Dagenham. Okay.
Hi, Eve. Just to say, Jo Wilson here. I've just arrived also from Barking and Dagenham.
Oh, hi, Jo. Yes, fabulous.
So I said I would only be able to come for this bit, but I'm here.
That's right. Oh, wonderful. So we're also joined by Jo of pre-record fame.
God. Excellent. Maybe it's good that I wasn't here. No.
One really important thing to say before we get into this is that you can sign up to all of those webinars using the link that Tilda has widely put into the chat. So we'll circulate all of this all those links along with the slides and any resources that we flagged afterwards. But we would strongly recommend that you promote those to your schools. So for those of us with questions, now is the time to answer them. Emily, do we have a few that were submitted ahead of time that we might be able to feed in to our panelists today?
Yeah, we do have a couple of pre-submitted questions, and we've also got an extra bit of video that we could share at this point if that's of interest.
Yeah, fabulous. Should we save that right until the end and we can send people off on a positive note?
Sounds good. Yeah, so one of the questions that came in is about the idea of the Pan-London framework. I know it was something that Gillian mentioned on her pre-record, but it would be interesting to hear from all the panelists about what they think of that idea and how it would work.
Do I have any takers on the appetite for a pan-London framework?
I could start off, Eve, by saying that in our experience from the schools that we talk to in the London boroughs, they would definitely be interested in understanding what that might mean to them and how accessible that could be and how that could help them. I was wondering whether the best practice examples like Southwark, how that could be sort of rolled out potentially. And perhaps even case studied and sort of considered for other boroughs. But I think there probably is, from what we're hearing, an appetite to certainly explore it further. Excuse the pun.
Thank you. Any other questions, framework related or otherwise?
I've dropped it in the chat, but I would say this, Eve. Newham would massively favour a pan-London procurement framework. We'd love to see something that was quality focused. The fantastic work that Southwark have done. Yeah, they're very modest, but it's a really tremendous bit of work that's getting great results for their schools. And for the first time in my life, leaving business managers not full of regret. You know, if I had, yeah, thank you, Harriet. If I had £1 for every time business manager said this has not turned out the way I thought it was going to. Nicola, I know this is your area of some expertise. Sad business managers who were promised the earth and now find themselves dealing with people that they basically cannot track down, as someone sitting in scaffolding and having building work done. You know, knowing where the end result is accountable to is everything, isn't it? Now, we have the London Circular Procurement Commitment. We have an incredible amount of work going on at the moment around sustainable procurement and the quality of food. And I was privileged last week or recently to be asked to read something that someone had done looking at Malmo and Sweden. Well, they have universal meals. Sweden as a country is smaller than London. And they're using their universal school meals scheme at the moment only in Malmo to stimulate local sustainable farming around their cities. Now, I look at a pan-London procurement framework with quality built in at 80-20 or 70-30. I think about the power we could have to be buying not just British, but from the southeast, the counties around where we are, and as a lever that could shape our city. Like, it takes a bit of ideation, doesn't it, from where we are now to where we could be. But from a Newham point of view, and this would fit neatly with what we're already signed up to as a council on climate change and just transition, on health, on, you know, ownership of the things around our city to make sure they stay healthy and well and strong. So, yeah, it'd be huge for us. I know it'd be similar for other boroughs. Joe, I don't know what you've got pre-approved, but, you know, for us, this would be huge.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Andy. I would just flag that we've got, on the sustainability point, representation from Re-London coming to the 27th. The webinar that follows this one for local authorities to talk just about that, the overlap with sustainability and kind of circular economy as well within London. Joe, would you like to come back on that?
It definitely. I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said, but I think it's a really good way to try and crack some of the challenges that we know exist around working with smaller producers, and just the reality of you know, the systems that are in place with large scale food producers that can kind of absorb the costs, some of the costs of like preparation and, you know, making things easy, which obviously everybody jumps at because everyone needs things to be easier and everyone needs things to be efficient. But it means we're stuck in a system, and the only way to get out of that system really is to innovate. It's really, really difficult to innovate at a small scale at the moment. So actually, you know, taking some of the authority of the Greater London and working together and, you know, providing a really big market offer to some of those smaller producers through working with some of those like ethical wholesalers that exist now, like Better Food Traders and some of the other, I'm sure there's others, but, you know, they would love the opportunity to be supplying schools, but it's just really difficult at the moment to be competitive. And I think we've got to work London-wide in order to crack some of those
those big challenges.
Great, thank you. I'm loving the scope of this chat and the ambitions within it. I can see another question that we've had from Ben on the chat in Haringey. Ben, I think, has had to leave us for another meeting, but since this is recorded, perhaps we could cover that off too. I'd appreciate any methods local authorities have of assessing and evaluating the food in schools beyond self-reporting. Now, School Food Matters, I should say, we spend a lot of time going into schools as part of our Nourish School Food Improvement programme to do observation days to really get a strong sense of what's happening in schools, what's being served across the day, how food's being learnt about, how food's being engaged with. Is anybody else here as a local authority doing some of that work to try and understand what's being provided? Yes, Faria.
Yeah, so happy to talk about how we do this in Southwark. So this is something that was born slightly before our school meals transformation programme kicked off in 2021. But in terms of, so drawing it all the way back to 2013, we started funding universal primary free school meals. And as part of that, we started to think maybe we have grant conditions around that funding. So in order to monitor the grant conditions, we kind of decided we need to have some form of monitoring what's happening in schools, what's being served. And I suppose kind of alongside the School Meals Transformation Programme, a couple of years leading up to that, we started to develop methodology for school visits. So we do have a few members of our team who are kind of trained to carry out school, we call them school visits to schools, that they are audits. So we have the checklist for school food standards. We also have a food environment survey that we have a checklist against. We speak to the head teacher, the SBMs, we speak to pupils about what they're eating, if they're enjoying it, all those sorts of things. And we look at the dining environment. And those visits have been happening formally for the last kind of 18 months. Prior to that, we did do ad hoc visits. And that's kind of our mechanism to do it. And we use our officer capacity to kind of carry out those school visits. And we found them really enlightening. We have been around to all of our schools now, and that took, about 18 months to do. So yeah, we've sort of had that in place, and we're now at a stage where we've got a lot of data that we're trying to crunch and produce a bit of a report about what we found. And what we do after these visits is we produce some recommendations and feedback for schools in an informal report, which we share with them. And what we're also designing at the moment is what the kind of second round of visits looks like, and also for schools who haven't kind of passed our scoring system, how we follow up with our feedback. So how we go back in to address the specific points of feedback that we provided on that first visit. So yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing.
Thank you so much, Freya. And what I would say, having worked closely with Southwark, is that it's just such an excellent example of how having boots on the ground is such a strong asset in terms of really understanding food provision in your borough. Yes, Becky, I can see that your hand is up.
Thanks. Yeah, really interesting session today. Thank you. Yeah, I suppose wanted to add to what was just said about how we know what's going on in schools around food. And actually, we, as a service, we are commissioned in different boroughs to deliver the Healthy Schools programme. So I work in Barking and Dagenham. So Joe and Lily are two people that I'm very familiar with and work with over there. But we also work in Barnet, Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster, and slightly different models in each borough. But part of being a healthy school, a bronze healthy school, or renewing your healthy school status, is to meet the school food standards. And so that is our mechanism in the way that we work with schools to make sure they are there. What we realised, I think, a few years ago is just sending a school the checklist and getting them to fill that in, they weren't really in a position where they could do that properly. We didn't feel, no fault of their own, but they didn't have the training or the understanding. And we were looking at checklists responses from the schools and then at their menus and thinking, even schools with borough caterers, borough approved caterers, we were thinking this isn't matching. We've got queries here about your menu. So what we do now is we review the menus for them. I know my colleagues on the call, Michelle, who's a dietitian in our team, we will review the menus. We produce a full report for them on all of their school food. So food, lunch, obviously breakfast, after school club, snacks, everything that they provide across the day. And we will give them the report on it, RAG rated of what they need to do, and we will make recommendations, often in regards to best practice. And I think because we have raised the status a little bit in the way that we work with schools, that has helped to make them sort of raise the status as well, alongside the work that Joe and Lily have been talking about in Barking and Dagenham, for instance, so that everything sits alongside each other really well. But yeah, I think we have a pan, I suppose what I'm saying as well is we have a pan-London approach to health and wellbeing through Healthy Schools. It's a programme run from the GLA, and most of our boroughs, of our 32 boroughs, are part of the Healthy Schools programme. And there is that requirement of bronze. So I think there's people on this call, I can see familiar names here, who are Healthy Schools leads, as well as other, as well as having other roles within the authority. So I suppose if there was that look to take an approach, pan-London, there's definitely colleagues who work very closely with schools already around this area that I think would, want to be part of that conversation and have information to feed in to it. But yeah, just wanted to raise that in terms of how we support the schools, and I'm sure there's similar models in other boroughs.
Thank you, Becky. I can see something so wonderful happening on the chat, which is people asking to visit each other. That's one of the things that we would strongly, strongly encourage is boroughs joining up to learn from each other and to have more detailed conversations outside of this call about what's worked, the benefits and challenges of different approaches. If anybody wants to do that, we can act as a sort of matchmaker, so you can get back in touch with us. But it's great to see people making those connections already just within this webinar. Any other thoughts to come back from Becky's point about kind of healthy schools? No, I can see some enthusiasm for that idea, Becky, on the chat. Maybe that's it.
No, just to reiterate, yes, it's always great to see you, Becky. But yeah, it would be fantastic to maximise that. Having just gone through like a bronze award for one of our schools and seen exactly the same issue with around the food standards, and how we know that there's a desire for schools to raise the standards of their food, and many feel stuck in a contract with somebody that, like you say, has promised the earth. And I just really feel there's within Hackney Council, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone else, there's whole teams, there's like our climate and sustainability team who want to address the fact of the carbon emissions around the food, and public health around the quality of the diet. And instead of us working in silos, there'd be huge support internally for us to do something dynamic. But we've been stuck at all of our schools are individually procuring, and there's a huge internal desire to do something about it. And I've met Andy and others around seeing what is happening in other boroughs, but how to do something more dynamic to improve it. Pan-London would be really, it's so needed and so valuable. And you can see the enthusiasm for this on just this call. Like, how do we do something progressive quickly, to kind of address this, because it's crucial, isn't it? I can't leave this meeting to go to my own team meeting because I'm so fired up about it. But yeah, I'd love to visit others and start plotting and planning. But this is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. I know that we have the Borough of Hillingdon on the call. Julia, this is not very fair to put you on the spot in this way. And it may be that I picked the exact moment that you've either logged off or gone to make a cup of tea. But I wondered
I'm
if you
here.
wanted to, I wondered if you felt able to say a few words about how the Borough of Hillingdon have started off that process of having kind of better conversations as a local authority around school food, and also how you've used Healthy Schools to begin those conversations and to focus them very much around school food.
Thanks. Thrown in there. Thanks, Eve.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think I guess it's work that's been happening over 18 months, understanding really what the school food landscape was and is in primary schools, which School Food Matters did an amazing job for us, looking at the audits and surveying schools and so going into schools and carrying out audits so that we had a really good picture of what some of the challenges are in Hillingdon. And then with partners in education and environmental health, we put together an action plan, a school self-assessment. And I think it's still really hard work. And I totally get what you're saying, Becky, about using Healthy Schools, but where engagement by schools is really hard. We're still very much stuck in a place. We're sadly stuck in a place of engaging schools. But the good part of all of that is that we have fantastic partnerships with education and environmental health. And I think probably the bit that I wanted to focus on, Eve, if out of all of that, is just really how our environmental health officers are adding a little monitoring visit on the end of food hygiene, their statutory food hygiene visit. So it's kept very separate, but it happens immediately after, where they'll ask some key questions and look at some key standard areas from a pilot that was carried out nationally. Well, it would have been a couple of years back now, but it's really positive. And where we're using some of the survey data, where schools rated their food as poor or only satisfactory, if that school then has a visit that's coming up, a food hygiene inspection that's due, we're prioritising those schools so that we can get a better sense of, what the provision looks like. So we've got a long way to go. We've got a very long way to go, but the conversation has changed, and I think it's changed because education are asking the questions now. And Eve, you'll be pleased we've redone some certain parts of the survey, and definitely I saw in the chat around the role of governors. Mm-hmm. We've had an increase in named governors now.
Wonderful.
Whether they're fulfilling a role, who knows? But there's the conversation and the profile has been raised.
Absolutely. Just by kind of starting off that quite long running in the end conversation within Hillingdon and engaging with schools. That's great to hear. Thank you, Julia. I'm going to put a pin in this discussion. I feel that we could carry on talking for a while. I want us to wrap up. So I'm the lead on research at School Food Matters. So I am now going to give you an evaluation form. This is the first of a series of 5 webinars. And what you tell us about today's session will really help us to nail the remaining 4, as well as shape the rest of the programme. So please don't hold back. I know my colleague Emily is going to pop that link in the chat now. We're going to follow up from today by circulating the slides, the resources that we've talked about. I know that some of you have kind of made connections already between you, but if anyone wants to come back to us for an intro, that's also so welcome. What we can do is, while you're filling out your form, we have some final messages from our wonderful contributors today that we wanted to share with you. And maybe that would be a great way to kind of round today's session off. Tilda, if you're able to pop the video back on.
If you're a local authority that has already allowed schools to oversee their own procurement, you'll have lots of different caterers operating in your borough at different contract price points. This framework agreement is quite a good model for bringing people back onto a local authority oversight situation, because schools can join the framework when their contracts come to an end. Southwark Council have proved there is a bit of a market for this in London at a borough level. So perhaps is there a framework agreement for London that we could consider, where we all come together and bring together our respective buying power?
I mean, I think the first thing is to see whether or not your local authority has a food partnership already, if we want to make changes. And if we want to make changes in difficult circumstances, particularly, then we need to work together and we need to kind of coordinate responses. The thing that's really useful is having frameworks and having things written down that you can always come back to, because someone can be really committed to this and then they move on, whether or not it's in a school or it's in your catering provider. Those things can change. So having frameworks, having, whether it's an action plan, whether it's been part of the food purchasing commitment, being able to always come back to something and saying, like, we agreed that this is what we're working on. Things will change and things will move if we kind of keep having the conversation.
What advice would you give to other boroughs? The first thing I would say to you is the option to include grant conditions and grant principles is open to every borough in London. The meal's in the middle of the day, but it's just at the middle of a whole school approach. And getting everything right across your school, from breakfast club to after school club, they all fall under the school food standards. They all fall under head teachers and governors' responsibilities. And then within that, the opportunities for food education. If you're not engaged with Veg Power, if you're not engaged with Pro Veg, if you're not engaged with all of the wonderful programs like School Food Matters, Nourish, get engaged, make it everything it can be with your support as a council, with your support as a public health team. It takes a very small amount of money, matched alongside, just a little bit of match alongside that money that pays for the meals, to really get a lot out of it.
Thank you so much for your time today, for joining us today. Thank you so much to our wonderful contributors, those who had a planned contribution, those who were imposed upon to give their thoughts at the last minute. It's all so appreciated. We really hope it was useful. Please fill out your forms. Let us know how we can improve on today's session to make the rest of the series even better. And we hope to see many of you back again on the 27th. Thanks all.
Thanks, Eve. Thanks, everyone.